Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the massive corridors of the council station for what she knew would be the last time. The walls glowed with soft blue light, and the air hummed with the sound of dozens of different life support systems working together. This place had been her home for 5 years, but today it felt cold and unwelcoming. She passed groups of alien delegates who turned away when they saw her coming. The tall, gray-skinned Korthani pretended to study their data tablets. The crystal-like Veltar dimmed their bodies until they were almost invisible. Even the floating Nephros gas beings retreated into their protective spheres when she walked by. Elena had seen this behavior for weeks now. The other species were avoiding humans, and she knew why. Today was the day of the vote. Today, the Galactic Council would decide whether humanity deserved to keep their voice in galactic affairs. The main council chamber was enormous, with seats arranged in perfect circles around a central speaking platform. 47 different species had representatives here, each one more ancient and supposedly wise than the last. Elena took her place at the human delegation table and looked around at faces that had once welcomed her with curiosity, if not friendship. Counselor Thexra of the Korthani stood up slowly. Her species was known for taking their time with everything. When they spoke, it was usually after hours of careful thought. When they made decisions, it was after cycles of consideration. Elena had learned to be patient with their ways, but she had never learned to stay quiet when she disagreed with their choices. Fellow beings of wisdom, Thexra began, her voice carrying the formal tone that the council loved so much. We gather today to address a problem that has grown beyond tolerance. For 30 years since we first welcomed the humans into our community, there has been disruption. Elena felt her jaw tighten. Disruption. That was their word for every time humans had questioned an old rule or suggested a better way of doing things. The humans speak without being asked, continued Thexra. They interrupt our careful deliberations with their hasty opinions. They question traditions that have kept peace in our galaxy for thousands of years. They make other species doubt the wisdom of our ancient ways. Around the chamber, heads nodded in agreement. The snake-like Silthari hissed their approval. The insect-like Zek clicked their mandibles in support. Elena looked at species that humans had helped over the years, species that had benefited from human medicine, human technology, human ideas. Now they all sat in judgment. We have tried to educate them in our ways, Thexra went on. We have explained the importance of contemplation over action, of consensus over conflict. But they persist in their disruptive behavior. They continue to challenge decisions that have been made through proper channels by wiser beings. Elena stood up. She was not supposed to speak yet, but staying quiet had never been humanity's strength. Counselor Thexra, if I may respond to these charges. The sound-dampening field activated immediately. Elena could see her lips moving, could feel her vocal cords vibrating. But no sound emerged. Around the chamber, the other delegates looked pleased. They had been using this technology more and more often during human presentations. Thexra smiled, showing teeth that looked like polished stone. As we can see, even now the human cannot wait for proper procedure. This is exactly the behavior we must address. Elena kept talking, even though no one could hear her. She spoke about the Xerian plague that human doctors had stopped from spreading. She mentioned the trade routes that human negotiators had opened. She reminded them of the technological advances that humans had freely shared, but her words disappeared into the dampening field. The solution is simple, Thexra announced. We will grant humanity contemplative status. They may remain in the council as observers. They may continue their trade and research, but they will no longer have a voice in our deliberations. They will learn the value of silence and reflection. The vote was quick. 46 species voted yes. Only the humans voted no, but their vote was silent, meaningless. Elena felt something break inside her chest, not her heart exactly, but something equally important. She had spent 5 years building relationships with these beings. She had learned their languages, studied their cultures, respected their traditions. She had believed that they were building something together, A community where different voices made everyone stronger, but they only wanted voices that agreed with them. Elena gestured to her fellow human delegates, Sarah Chen from the Trade Division, Marcus Webb from the Science Council, David Kim from the Cultural Exchange Program. All of them had worked tirelessly to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. Now those bridges were burning. They gathered their belongings in silence. Data tablets, cultural gifts, research notes, everything they had brought to build connections now felt useless. The other delegates watched them pack with expressions that ranged from relief to satisfaction. A few looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up. As they reached the chamber doors, Elena turned back one more time. She looked at each species that had voted to silence her people. She memorized their faces, their postures, their smug expressions. Then she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She smiled. It was not a bitter smile or an angry one. It was the smile of someone who had finally understood something important. Elena had spent 5 years trying to fit into their system, trying to make humanity's voice heard within their ancient structures. She had believed that being part of the council was the most important thing for humanity's future. But maybe she had been wrong. Maybe humanity did not need their permission to exist, to grow, to thrive. Maybe the galaxy was bigger than this chamber, bigger than these 46 species who were so afraid of change that they would rather silence new ideas than consider them. Elena walked out of the council chamber with her head high. Behind her, she could hear the delegates beginning their next discussion. Their voices rose and fell in the careful, measured tones that they preferred. No interruptions, no challenging questions, no uncomfortable truths, just the sound of a community talking to itself in an echo chamber. The human delegation made their way to the docking bay where their ship waited. The Determination was not the largest vessel in the bay, but it was fast and efficient, built by human engineering with human innovation. Elena had always been proud of it, but now she felt something more than pride. She felt freedom. As they prepared for departure, Elena sent a final message to Earth and all human colonies. The words were simple. We are no longer welcome to speak in their halls, so we will speak with our actions instead. The Determination undocked from the council station and turned toward human space. Elena did not look back at the massive structure that had been her home for 5 years. She was already thinking about the future, about what humanity could accomplish when they stopped asking for permission and started taking action. Behind them, the council station continued its slow orbit around Kepler 432b. Inside, 46 species continued their careful deliberations, pleased with the peace they had achieved. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. 5 years had passed since the humans left the council station in silence. Counselor Thexra sat in her private chambers, reviewing the monthly reports with satisfaction. The council meetings ran smoothly now. Decisions were made through proper contemplation. The ancient protocols were followed exactly as they had been for thousands of years. Peace had returned to the galaxy. At least that was what the report said. But lately, Thexra had been noticing strange details that troubled her. The human trade ships still moved through galactic space, but their crews barely spoke to other species. When docking requests were approved, human captains would transmit a simple, "Thank you," and nothing more. No small talk, no cultural exchange, no friendly conversations about family or home worlds. The humans had become polite ghosts. Captain Jormai of the Veltar merchant vessel Crystal Wind had tried to start a conversation with a human trader just last week. The human captain, a woman named Rodriguez, had been professional but distant. She had conducted their business with perfect efficiency, then departed without the usual pleasantries that had once made trade relationships enjoyable. It is as if they have forgotten how to be social, Jormai had reported to his superiors. They speak only when necessary and share nothing of themselves. This was happening everywhere. Human colonies continued to grow and prosper, but they stopped requesting aid from other species. They stopped offering assistance to neighbors in need. They stopped participating in the cultural festivals and scientific conferences that had once brought the galaxy together. The humans were following the letter of their contemplative status perfectly. They observed. They remained silent. They contemplated. But something else was happening that the Council had not expected. Deep in the asteroid fields of the Vega system, something was hunting the Zephyrian pirates. For decades, these raiders had been a constant problem, attacking trade convoys and stealing from mining operations. The Council's peacekeeping forces had tried to stop them many times, but the pirates were clever and well-armed. Now, one by one, their hidden bases were being destroyed. The attacks were surgical and precise. No warnings were given. No demands for surrender were broadcast. The pirate bases simply exploded in brilliant flashes of light, leaving behind debris and empty space. Survivors spoke of ships that moved unlike anything they had ever seen, vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. When the Veltar Diplomatic Corps sent inquiries to human space, asking if they knew anything about these mysterious attacks, they received automated responses. The messages were always the same. This matter has been resolved. No further action required. Admiral Kextor of the Korthani Defense Fleet found this response deeply disturbing. They are taking action without consulting the Council, he reported to Thexra. They are solving problems that we have struggled with for years, but they are not asking for permission or offering explanation. Thexra studied the report with growing unease. The humans were not breaking any laws. Their ships were not attacking innocent vessels. In fact, the elimination of the Zephyrian pirates was beneficial to everyone in the galaxy. But the way they were doing it felt wrong. They are supposed to be contemplating, she murmured to herself. They are supposed to be learning patience and wisdom. Instead, the humans seemed to be learning something else entirely. They were learning to act without consulting others. They were learning to solve their own problems without asking for help. They were learning to exist independently of the galactic community that had silenced them. The pattern became more obvious as months passed. When slavers operating near human colonies were found dead in their ships, human authorities denied involvement, but offered no assistance with the investigation. When a dangerous virus outbreak threatened the Rigel colonies, human medical ships arrived to help, but their doctors worked in silence and left as soon as the crisis was over. The humans were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a major spacefaring species that functioned entirely without the Council's oversight. Dr. Murdak of the ancient Titanide species was among the first to voice concern. The Titanides were older than most civilizations in the galaxy, and they had seen many changes over the millennia. During a private meeting with senior counselors, Murdak shared an observation that made everyone uncomfortable. We celebrated the return of harmony, the ancient being said, its crystalline form pulsing with worried energy. But harmony without growth is stagnation. The humans were our source of new ideas, new solutions, new ways of thinking. In silencing them, we may have silenced our own progress. Thexra dismissed this concern publicly, but privately she was beginning to worry. The galaxy did feel different now. The Council meetings were peaceful, but they were also boring. The same old problems were discussed with the same old solutions. Nothing new was being created. Nothing innovative was being attempted. Meanwhile, reports from human space painted a picture of rapid advancement. Human colonies were developing new technologies at an unprecedented rate. Their ships were becoming faster and more efficient. Their settlements were expanding into regions that other species had considered too dangerous or difficult to colonize. It was as if humanity had been freed from the slow, careful pace of galactic civilization and was now racing ahead at their own speed. The most troubling incident occurred near the end of the 5th year. A massive solar flare had damaged the atmospheric processors on Kepler 186f, threatening the lives of 2 million Zek colonists. The traditional response would have been to form a Council emergency committee, debate the best course of action, and then mobilize a rescue mission after proper deliberation. But before the Council could even convene, human ships were already en route to the planet. They arrived within hours, not days. Their engineers worked around the clock to repair the damaged systems, saving countless lives. When the crisis was over, they departed without ceremony or recognition. The council never had a chance to help because the humans had solved the problem before the council had finished discussing it. This is not how things are supposed to work. Admiral Kextor complained to anyone who would listen. They are bypassing proper procedures. They are acting without authority. But Thexra was beginning to understand something that frightened her. The humans were not acting without authority. They were acting with their own authority. They had stopped asking permission from the council because they no longer needed it. Humanity was learning to exist without them. In her private moments, Thexra found herself remembering the debates she used to have with Ambassador Vasquez. The dear, human woman had been frustrating, always questioning established wisdom and proposing alternative solutions. But those discussions had been stimulating. They had forced Thexra to examine her own beliefs and consider new possibilities. Now there was no one to challenge her thinking, no one to offer uncomfortable questions or propose unconventional solutions. The council had achieved perfect agreement, but that agreement felt hollow. As she reviewed the latest reports from across the galaxy, Thexra realized that they had made a terrible mistake. They had thought they were removing a disruptive influence from their community. Instead, they had removed the very thing that had kept their community alive and growing. The humans had not learned to be quiet and contemplative. They had learned to be independent, and the galaxy was becoming a smaller, quieter place without their voice. 7 years after the human delegation had walked out of the council chambers, the galaxy was discovering what absence truly meant. It was not just the empty chairs at the council table, or the silence where human voices once challenged ancient wisdom. It was the slow realization that something vital had been cut away, leaving wounds that would not heal. Dr. Yelandra of the Zephyrian Medical Institute stared at the data scrolling across her screen with growing horror. The Xerion plague was spreading again. The deadly virus that attacked neural tissue had been contained for over a decade, but now it was moving through the outer colonies like wildfire. The solution should have been simple. For years, human researchers had shared their advanced medical techniques freely with the galactic community. Their understanding of biological systems was unmatched, and their ability to develop treatments quickly had saved countless lives across dozens of species. But when Yelandra's team reached out to human medical centers, they received polite but devastating responses. The humans would treat any infected individuals who came to their facilities, but they would not share their research data. They would not send specialist teams to help contain the outbreak. They would not offer the innovative solutions that had once made them invaluable partners. "We are operating under contemplative status," the human medical administrator had explained in a brief communication. "We observe and reflect. We do not initiate collaborative research projects." The plague spread to 17 star systems before the combined efforts of Zephyrian, Veltar, and Korthani medical teams finally contained it. The death toll was over 3 million beings. Yelandra knew that human intervention could have reduced that number to hundreds, maybe thousands at most. But the humans had been taught to stay silent, and they had learned the lesson well. On the industrial world of Procyon B, Chief Engineer Rektan faced a different kind of crisis. The planet's massive fusion reactors were failing, and no one could determine why. The reactor technology was ancient but reliable, unchanged for thousands of years. Yet somehow the energy output was declining steadily, threatening to leave 40 billion inhabitants without power. 3 years ago, Rektan would have contacted the Human Engineering Corps without hesitation. Humans had an almost supernatural ability to understand complex systems and find solutions that others missed. They saw problems from angles that other species never considered. Instead, Rektan spent months working with traditional engineering teams from across the galaxy. They followed established protocols, consulted ancient manuals, and applied time-tested solutions. Nothing worked. The reactors continued to fail, and the planet descended toward an energy crisis that could lead to the collapse of an entire civilization. The solution came finally from an unexpected source. A young Veltar engineer named Christel had studied at a human university before the silencing. She remembered techniques that humans had shared about adaptive system management. Working in secret, she applied these methods and discovered that The reactors were not actually failing. They were evolving, becoming more efficient but incompatible with the control systems designed for their original specifications. The fix was simple once the problem was understood, but it had taken months to find because no one thought to ask the humans who would have identified the issue in days. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. On the rim worlds, artificial intelligence systems began to malfunction in ways that traditional debugging could not solve. The Council's computer specialists worked for weeks on problems that human cyberneticists could have fixed in hours. Mining operations on asteroid fields ground to a halt when extraction equipment encountered unexpected geological formations. Trade disputes between species escalated into near conflicts because no one could find the creative compromises that human negotiators had once provided. The galaxy had not realized how much it depended on humanity's unique perspective until that perspective was no longer available. In the council chambers, emergency sessions became more frequent. Problems that had once been solved quickly now dragged on for months. Councillor Thexera found herself longing for the days when Ambassador Vasquez would interrupt their careful deliberations with an urgent, "Have you considered?" or "What if we tried?" Those interruptions had been annoying, but they had also been necessary. "We are facing a crisis of innovation," announced Councillor Murdoch during one particularly difficult session. The ancient Titanide's crystalline form pulsed with urgent energy. "Our methods work for maintaining stability, but they do not work for solving new problems. We have become a civilization that can preserve the past, but cannot create the future." The other counselors listened uncomfortably. They all knew it was true, but none wanted to admit it openly. The humans had been their troubleshooters, their source of unconventional solutions, their bridge between the impossible and the possible. Without them, the galaxy was running on intellectual reserves that were slowly being depleted. Species began reaching out to human colonies directly, bypassing the council entirely. The requests were always polite, always respectful, always desperate. Help with technical problems, assistance with medical crises, guidance on trade disputes, solutions to questions that no one else could answer. The humans responded to direct requests with professional efficiency. They would solve the specific problem they were asked to solve, nothing more. They shared their solutions freely but offered no additional insights. They answered questions but asked none in return. Captain Jexri of the Silthari exploration fleet experienced this new reality firsthand when his ship encountered an unknown energy phenomenon that disabled their engines. Stranded in deep space, he sent a distress call to the nearest human patrol vessel. The human ship arrived within hours. Its captain, a stern woman named Harrison, listened to Jexri's explanation of the problem, then deployed a series of technical probes that quickly identified the issue. The energy phenomenon was a natural occurrence that could be safely navigated using specific shield configurations. Captain Harrison transmitted the technical specifications to Jexri's ship and waited while his crew implemented the solution. Once the Silthari vessel was safely mobile again, she prepared to depart. "Wait," Jexri called over the communication link. "This phenomenon, we have never encountered anything like it. Could you share your research data? Other ships could benefit from understanding it better." Harrison's expression was polite but distant. "I have solved your immediate problem, Captain. That is what you requested. But surely you must have theories about how this phenomenon forms or where else it might be found, or—" "I am not authorized to speculate," Harrison interrupted. "We are operating under contemplative status. We observe and respond to direct requests. We do not offer unsolicited analysis or advice." The communication ended, leaving Jexri staring at his screens in frustration. The humans had saved his ship and crew, but they had shared only the minimum necessary information. There had been no discussion of the broader implications, no collaborative exploration of the discovery, no building of knowledge together. It was efficient, but it was also hollow. Reports like this reached the Council regularly. The humans were still present in the galaxy, still active in trade and exploration, still willing to help when directly asked. But they had become something they had never been before. Isolated, They were solving their own problems without sharing the solutions. They were making discoveries without publishing the results. They were advancing their own civilization while the rest of the galaxy struggled with challenges that human insight could easily resolve. Dr. Merdak presented a comprehensive analysis to the Council that shocked everyone who heard it. In the ISO, 7 years since humanity's silencing, the rate of technological advancement in the galaxy had dropped by 60%. New solutions to old problems had virtually disappeared. Innovation had slowed to a crawl. Meanwhile, human space was thriving. Their colonies were expanding into regions that other species considered uninhabitable. Their ships were becoming more advanced than anything the Council could build. Their society was solving problems and overcoming challenges at an unprecedented rate. We have created 2 galaxies, Merdak concluded. One where humanity advances rapidly because they are free to think and act without our restrictions, and one where the rest of us stagnate because we have lost the very quality that made us strong, the willingness to question, to challenge, to grow. Thexra listened to this assessment with growing dread. She was beginning to understand that they had not simply silenced a disruptive voice. They had amputated a vital organ from the galactic body, and now that body was slowly dying from the loss. The humans had been their conscience, their source of innovation, their reminder that tradition without growth was just another word for death. In removing them from the conversation, the Council had not achieved peace. They had achieved stagnation. And the worst part was that the humans seemed perfectly content with their isolation. They were no longer asking to be heard. They were no longer trying to change anyone's mind or solve anyone's problems unless specifically requested. They had learned to exist without the galaxy, while the galaxy was slowly discovering that it could not exist without them. 9 years had passed since the human delegation left the Council station, and Counselor Thexra was about to learn that some mistakes echo through time until they become disasters. The first warning came from the deep space monitoring stations in the galactic core. Ancient sensors, some older than recorded history, began detecting movement in regions that had been dead for thousands of years. The readings made no sense. Massive energy signatures were awakening in areas where nothing should exist except cosmic dust and dying stars. Dr. Yilmoth of the Astronomical Survey Corps brought the data to the Council with hands that trembled with more than age. The old Veltar had studied the galactic core for 3 centuries, and he had never seen anything like these readings. The gravitational mining operations in Sector 7G have disturbed something, he announced to the emergency session. Something that has been sleeping in the core for longer than our oldest records suggest. The holographic display showed energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Vast mechanical structures were rising from what everyone had thought was empty space. Ships, if they could be called ships, the size of small moons were moving through, the cosmic debris with purpose and intelligence. "What are we looking at?" asked Admiral Kextor, his military instincts already calculating threat levels and response strategies. Dr. Yilmoth's form flickered with fear. According to our historical archives, these match descriptions of the Devourers, the machine intelligence that consumed 17 star systems before going dormant 3,000 years ago. We thought they were extinct. The Council chamber fell, silent. Every species had stories about the Devourers, ancient warnings passed down through generations. They were not conquerors in any traditional sense. They did not want territory or resources. They simply consumed everything in their path, breaking down matter and energy to fuel their own reproduction and growth. 3,000 years ago, the galaxy's greatest military alliance had barely stopped them, and only because the machines had suddenly gone dormant for unknown reasons. Now it seemed the deep mining operations had awakened them again. "How long do we have?" Thexra asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "Based on their current movement patterns, they will reach the first inhabited systems in 18 months, Admiral Kextor reported. "We need to mobilize everything we have." For the next 6 months, the galaxy prepared for war. Ancient defense protocols were activated. Military fleets that had been ceremonial for centuries were brought to full combat readiness. Species that had not fought together for millennia began coordinating their forces. But as the preparation continued, a terrible realization began to dawn on the military commanders. Their weapons were old, their strategies were older, their tactics had not evolved significantly in hundreds of years because there had been no need. The galaxy had been at peace for so long that the art of war had become a historical curiosity. The Devourers, meanwhile, seemed to have learned from their previous defeat. Their ships were more advanced than the ancient records suggested. Their tactics were adaptive and unpredictable. They had evolved during their long sleep, while the galaxy had remained static. "We need new strategies," Admiral Kextor admitted during a private meeting with senior council members. "Our traditional approaches will not work against this enemy. We need innovation." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Innovation, the quality that the council had systematically discouraged for nearly a decade, the disruptive thinking that they had silenced because it made them uncomfortable. Thexra felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. "We need the humans," she said quietly. The admission was painful, but it was also obvious. Humanity had always excelled at the impossible. They found solutions where others saw only problems. They adapted faster than any other species, learned quicker, innovated constantly. During the early years of galactic contact, human military advisors had revolutionized warfare theory with concepts that other species would never have considered. But the humans had been silent for 9 years. They had learned to solve their own problems without sharing the solutions. They had built their own defenses without consulting the galactic community. Would they even care about a threat to the species that had rejected them? The Council's desperate delegation arrived at New Geneva on a bright morning when the human capital world looked more prosperous than ever. The cities were clean and efficient, the countryside was green and carefully managed, and the orbital platforms hummed with activity. This was a civilization that had not stagnated during its exile from galactic politics. Ambassador Chen Wei received the delegation in a conference room that was notably smaller than the grand chambers of the council station. She was younger than Thexra had expected, probably born after the silencing. She listened to their desperate plea, with the polite attention of someone who had been trained in diplomatic courtesy, but felt no emotional connection to the speakers. The Devourers represent an existential threat to all life in the galaxy, Thexra explained, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "We need humanity's help to develop new strategies, new weapons, new approaches to defeating them." Chen nodded politely. "I understand the gravity of the situation, Counselor. However, I must ask, why should humanity involve itself in this conflict?" The question struck Thexra like a physical blow. Because we are all part of the same galaxy. Because this threatens everyone, including humanity." "Does it?" Chen asked mildly. "The Devourers are moving toward the galactic core systems. Human space is primarily in the outer rim. By the time they reach us, if they reach us, they will either have been stopped by your forces, or they will have consumed so much that stopping them will be impossible anyway." Admiral Kextor leaned forward urgently. "But surely you cannot simply stand by and watch other species be destroyed." Chen's expression remained calm. "Admiral, 9 years ago, the galactic community decided that humanity's voice was not welcome in galactic affairs. You taught us that our perspectives were disruptive and unwanted. You silenced us because you preferred the peace of your own consensus." She gestured to a display screen that showed news feeds from across human space. "We learned the lesson well. We stopped trying to solve other people's problems. We stopped offering unsolicited advice. We stopped being disruptive. We became the contemplative, quiet species you wanted us to be. But this is different," Thexra protested. "This is an emergency. Every crisis is an emergency to those experiencing it," Chen replied. "The Zarian plague was an emergency to the 3 million beings who died from it. The fusion reactor failures on Procyon B were an emergency to 40 billion inhabitants. The AI uprising on the Rim worlds was an emergency to everyone who lost family members. The list of crises continued, each one a reminder of problems that human intervention could have solved quickly and efficiently. Problems that had instead become tragedies because the galaxy had decided it did not want human help unless specifically requested. We helped when directly asked, Chen continued. We solved the specific problems we were given, but we did not offer broader assistance because we were taught that such offers were unwelcome disruptions of galactic harmony. Thexra felt something breaking inside her chest. We were wrong, she admitted. We made a terrible mistake. We are asking for your forgiveness and your help. For the first time, Chen's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been sadness. Counselor, forgiveness is possible. Trust, however, is more difficult to rebuild. You spent 30 years benefiting from human innovation, and then 9 years teaching us that our contributions were unwanted. Why? Should we believe that you will value our voice after this crisis passes? The question hung in the air without an answer. Everyone in the room knew the truth. If humanity saved the galaxy from the Devourers, there was no guarantee that the Council would not eventually decide once again that human perspectives were too disruptive for galactic harmony. What would you need from us? Thexra asked desperately. Full voting rights, representation proportional to population, veto power over Council decisions? Chen shook her head. You still do not understand, Counselor. This is not about political power or representation. This is about fundamental respect for different ways of thinking. You cannot simply grant us privileges when you need us, and take them away when we become inconvenient. She stood up, signaling that the meeting was ending. Humanity will defend our own territory and our own people. We will evacuate refugees who request assistance. We will provide medical aid to survivors. But we will not lead a galactic war effort for a community that spent 9 years teaching us that we are not truly part of it. As the delegation prepared to leave, Chen added one final observation that cut deeper than any previous words. You taught us the value of silence, Counselor Thexra. You taught us that some voices are not worth hearing. You taught us that harmony is more important than growth, consensus more valuable than innovation. We have learned these lessons perfectly. The human capital world disappeared behind them as their ship departed for Council space. Inside the vessel, the delegation sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had lost. They had not. The war against the Devourers lasted 18 months, and it changed everything in the galaxy except the thing that mattered most. Counselor Thexra stood in the ruins of what had once been the proud military command center on Rigel Prime, watching smoke rise from the debris of a civilization. Around her, the survivors worked with grim determination to clear the wreckage and count their losses. The numbers were staggering, but she had stopped paying attention to statistics weeks ago. Every number represented worlds that would never recover, species that might never rebuild, cultures that had been erased forever. The galaxy had won, technically. The Devourers had been stopped before they could consume everything in their path. But victory felt hollow when it came at such a price. 60% of the inhabited worlds in the galactic core had been destroyed or abandoned. 3 entire species had been wiped out completely. 2 others were reduced to small populations of refugees with no homeworlds to return to. The great trade networks that had connected distant stars for millennia lay in ruins. The galactic economy had collapsed into isolated pockets of survivors, trying to rebuild from scattered pieces. The irony was not lost on Thexra. The galaxy had achieved the ultimate consensus. Everyone agreed that the Devourers needed to be stopped. There had been no dissenting voices, no disruptive questions, no challenging alternative perspectives. The 46 remaining Council species had worked together with perfect harmony and ancient wisdom, and they had nearly lost everything. The breakthrough that finally turned the tide came from an unexpected source. A young Korthani engineer named Vextel had spent time studying at human universities before the silencing. She remembered theories about adaptive warfare that human strategists had developed, concepts that seemed chaotic and unpredictable to traditional military thinking. Working in secret with a small team of similarly trained beings, Vextel had developed new tactics based on these half-remembered human ideas. Instead of meeting the Devourers with organized battle lines and careful strategies, Her forces used rapid deployment, constant adaptation, and deliberately unpredictable attack patterns. The approach worked, but it took months for the military, commanders to accept it. The tactics felt wrong to species that valued order and deliberation. They required split-second decisions, constant improvisation, and the willingness to abandon plans when circumstances changed. Everything that the galactic military tradition considered inappropriate. By the time the new strategies were fully implemented, billions had already died. Throughout the war, human ships were observed at the edges of battle zones. They evacuated refugees when directly requested. They provided medical aid to survivors. They delivered supplies to besieged colonies, but they never engaged the devourers directly, never offered strategic advice, never provided the innovative solutions that could have shortened the conflict and saved countless lives. Admiral Kextor had tried repeatedly to contact human fleet commanders during the worst phases of the war. His messages were always answered politely and promptly. Human Captain Sarah Kim had explained the situation with perfect clarity. "Admiral, we are operating under contemplative status as defined by galactic consensus. We observe, we reflect, we respond to direct requests for specific assistance. We do not initiate strategic coordination or offer unsolicited tactical advice. This policy was established by council vote and has been maintained consistently for over 9 years. But people are dying," Kextor had protested. "Yes," Captain Kim had agreed sadly. "People have been dying from preventable causes for 9 years while we maintained proper silence. The Xerian plague, the fusion reactor failures, the AI uprisings. Each crisis could have been resolved more quickly with human involvement, but such involvement was deemed disruptive to galactic harmony." The conversation had ended there, leaving Kextor to face a horrible realization. The humans were not being petty or vindictive. They were simply following the rules that the galaxy had established for them. They had learned to be exactly what the Council had wanted: quiet, contemplative, and non-disruptive. The fact that this behavior was now contributing to galactic destruction was merely proof that the Council had chosen poorly. In the aftermath of the war, as survivors struggled to rebuild their shattered worlds, a comprehensive analysis was conducted to understand what had gone wrong. The report, compiled by Dr. Merdak and a team of researchers from 17 species, painted a devastating picture of civilizational decline. The statistics were brutal. Innovation rates across the galaxy had dropped by 73% since humanity's silencing. Problem-solving efficiency had declined by 60%. The time required to develop solutions to new challenges had increased by over 200%. Most damaging of all, the galaxy had lost its ability to think creatively about existential threats. "We created an echo chamber," Dr. Merdak announced to the emergency council session. "For 9 years, we have been talking to ourselves, reinforcing our own biases, confirming our own assumptions. We eliminated the voice that challenged us to grow, and as a result, we stopped growing." The report detailed what had happened to human civilization during the same period. Freed from the need to conform to galactic consensus, humanity had experienced an unprecedented explosion of innovation. Their technology had advanced by generations. Their colonies had expanded into regions that other species considered uninhabitable. Their society had solved problems that the Council did not even know existed yet. Most importantly, they had developed new forms of thinking that combined individual creativity with collective wisdom. They had learned to harness disagreement as a source of strength rather than seeing it as a threat to harmony. "They have become what we could have been," Dr. Merdak concluded. "While we stagnated in comfortable consensus, they evolved into something more adaptive, more creative, more alive." The final insult came when the Council tried to re-establish formal relations with humanity. A new delegation was sent to New Geneva with offers of full membership, expanded voting rights, and guaranteed representation. They were received with perfect courtesy by Ambassador Chen Wei, who listened to their proposals with polite attention. "We appreciate the Council's desire to rebuild relationships," Chen replied when they had finished. "However, humanity has evolved beyond the need for external validation or permission We have learned to exist as an independent civilization, and we find this arrangement preferable to our previous status. The delegation offered concessions, compromises, and even reparations for past wrongs. Chen listened to each proposal and declined them all with the same calm professionalism. "You are asking us to rejoin a community that taught us we were not wanted," she explained. "You are offering us a voice in decisions that we have learned to make independently. You are inviting us back to a table where we were told our perspectives were too disruptive to be valuable." Thexra, who was part of this final delegation, made one last desperate plea. "But we need you," she said, abandoning all diplomatic protocol. "The galaxy needs your innovation, your creativity, your willingness to challenge old assumptions. Without you, we are dying slowly." Chen's expression softened slightly, revealing the first hint of genuine emotion the delegation had seen. "Counselor Thexra, 9 years ago you taught us a valuable lesson about the difference between being needed and being wanted. You needed our innovations, but you did not want our questions. You needed our solutions, but you did not want our challenges to your thinking." She gestured toward a window that showed the bustling activity of New Geneva's spaceport. "We have learned to want ourselves, to value our own perspectives, to trust our own judgment. We no longer need external validation to know that our voices have worth." The meeting ended with humanity's polite but firm rejection of all offers to return to galactic civilization. They would continue trading with other species, providing aid when directly requested, and maintaining peaceful relations with their neighbors. But they would not rejoin the community that had rejected them. Years later, Thexra found herself standing in the observation deck of the rebuilt council station, watching human ships pass through the trade lanes. They were close enough to see but too distant to communicate with meaningfully. The humans had kept their word. They remained silent in galactic affairs. But their silence had become the loudest statement of all. The galaxy was functioning again, slowly rebuilding from the devastation of the war. But it was a smaller place now, quieter, more predictable. The council meetings ran smoothly with perfect consensus. Decisions were made through careful deliberation and ancient wisdom. Everything was exactly as it had been before humanity joined the galactic community, except for one crucial difference. Now everyone knew what they had lost. In silencing humanity's voice, the council had not achieved harmony. They had achieved conformity. They had not gained wisdom through consensus. They had gained stagnation through the elimination of dissent. They had not created a peaceful galaxy. They had created a dying one. The humans continued their silent journey through space, no longer part of the galactic community, but no longer needing to be. They had found something more valuable than acceptance from others. They had found acceptance of themselves.